First of all, congratulations on the Templeton Prize, Jane Goodall. When you got the news, how did you feel and what was your reaction?
Well, I was absolutely amazed. The Templeton Prize had been in the back of my mind for a long time, and I know the kind of people who've been given it, but it sort of came into focus last year when Francis Collins of NIH got the prize, because he's a really good friend of mine. And so I knew a lot more about it by the time I got it, and could have knocked me over with a feather.
You've been spending your time during this pandemic in your native England, and it's the first time that you've stayed in one place for more than 2 weeks in the last 3 decades. So what has been like for you? And tell us how how have you been spending this time?
Okay, well, when I first, was grounded, I was actually on my way to the airport to give a talk in the United Nations building in Brussels. And I got a frantic call saying, stop, come back. The UN building's closed, the lecture's cancelled. And it was fortunate I was here at home. This is the house I grew up in, where I share it with my sister, but she's been actually living here with her family. So, at first I was frustrated and angry, and because, I'm so used to going and talking to audiences around the world. And then I thought, well, this is silly. There's no point feeling this way. What is. I mean, what is. And so with my wonderful team from JGI, Jane Goodall Institute, we created Virtual Jane. I thought I was busy traveling 300 days a year. That was a piece of cake compared to this. It's been every day, Zooms and podcasts and webinars and video messages and virtual lectures and virtually attending conferences and being on panels. And then, of course, on top of that, all the emails. And I've never been as busy or exhausted, actually, in my whole life. It's just, but the silver lining, I've been able to reach, I'm told, literally millions more people, millions, like around 8 more million in many more countries than if I'd been doing my normal travels. So that's the silver lining. I get the message out further.
And when you think about your message, how would you encapsulate what you've been trying to share, not only your entire life and career, Jane, but particularly during this time?
Well, 2 things. One, the true nature of animals, and the fact that, we've brought this pandemic on ourselves, as we have brought previous zoonotic diseases. That's when a pathogen jumps from an animal to a person, where it may create a new disease. 75% of all new human emerging diseases are zoonotic in origin. And it's our disrespect of animals, crowding into their habitat, forcing them in closer contact with us, hunting them, killing them, eating them, capturing them, trafficking them around the world, selling them for food, for medicine, for their skins, and for exotic pets in the wildlife markets of Asia, the bushmeat markets of Africa, and similar markets in Latin America, pets all around the world. And so it's been relatively easy for this virus to jump from one animal, nobody quite knows which, to a human in a wildlife market in China. But HIV, for example, started from eating contaminated chimpanzees in Central Africa. And MERS began from domestic bacterial camels in Saudi Arabia. So everybody keeps pointing a finger at China. It's not only China. Our factory farms, where we crowd billions of animals in horrendous conditions, very unsanitary as well as being cruel, and clearing huge amounts of land to feed them, wasting water to change vegetable to animal protein. They've all produced methane gas, which is a very virulent greenhouse gas. And it's, we've got to move towards a plant-based diet. That's one message. We've got to recognize that animals are sentient beings. They feel fear, despair, and pain. And we must somehow create a new relationship with the natural world, because it's our disrespect of the natural world that's led to climate change and loss of biodiversity. These are far greater threats to our future than this pandemic.
Do you feel as if humankind has learned a valuable lesson as a result of this, or are you afraid that it will be business as usual as the world opens up?
Well, it's both. I think there's huge awareness about the fact that, you know, we're responsible for this pandemic, and people are waking up as we sort of move, in some countries anyway, away from the pandemic to these twin threats of climate change and loss of biodiversity. But on the other hand, there are business leaders and political leaders desperately anxious to get back to business as usual. And it's going to depend how much groundswell can we have of ordinary people. I mean, just think of people in great big crowded cities like Mumbai or, you know, these other huge mega cities, where during the pandemic, as things were closed down, many people must have seen for the very first time shining stars in the night sky, not through a mist of haze. And they must have had the luxury of breathing clean air. And they won't want to go back to business as usual. But it's all going to depend on the government of the countries, how autocratic they are, how strong is the tie between business and government, how entrenched are people in this crazy, ridiculous notion we can have unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources already being used up in some places faster than nature can replenish them, added to which we have a growing human population, a growing population of livestock, and so many people having a lifestyle that is totally unsustainable while the rest of the world is in abject poverty.
I'm pretty depressed, Jane.
Well, that's the truth. That's the reality. And so people say to me, well, Jane, do you have hope? I do have hope. And, you know, all my lectures, all my talks, all my books, I've just written a book called The Book of Hope. And all of them have this thread of hope, but it's hope. It depends on if we have a window of time. And I'm not alone. There are other scientists believing this, scientists who are economists and so on. We have a window of time when we can turn things around and at least slow down climate change, slow down loss of biodiversity, work together to plant trees, restore forests, protect old growth forests, protect animals from extinction, give them another chance if they're close to extinction. We've got the young people, my greatest reason for hope, when they know the problems and they're empowered to take action, like in my Roots and Shoots program, which began in 91. It's now in 67 countries, growing. Thousands of groups from kindergarten, university, everything in between. More and more corporations, businesses are having their staff involved. So adults are becoming involved. We're in prisons, we're in old people's homes. And these young people, once they are empowered, their energy, their determination, their commitment, their passion, you cannot go around as I have been doing and hear what they're doing and see their shining eyes and their eagerness to tell Dr. Jane what they're doing, what they plan to do, what they've done. You can't be present and not be incredibly inspired and hopeful. And places that we've utterly destroyed with our, you know, yet one more shopping mall, one more road, one more dam. If you remove the shopping mall, the road and the dam, nature will take over. Even quarries that are miles of absolute nothingness can be restored and nature can take over and animals can return. And then finally, there's the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up and so often succeed.
We
So
live
hope. There is hope, but it depends on us getting together now. It's like this pandemic is a clarion call for action. And, you know, some governments at least are talking more about it.
It was amazing to see dolphins in the Venice Canal, wasn't it, Jane? It was amazing to see these star-filled skies and just extraordinary changes as a result of as if Mother Earth was almost taking a breath.
Yes, but unfortunately, the breath didn't last long, did it? I know here, when at the height of the lockdown, I was out in the garden under the tree. I used to spend hours up as a child, beech tree, and I would eat my little sandwich under the tree with a robin and a blackbird. And during the height of the shutdown, it was quiet. And then gradually things opened up and the traffic came back. And it's just so sad because I know what it could be like and should be like.
We live in an incredibly wasteful time where convenience and disposability are the norm. How do you think your experiences during World War II changed your perception and gave you a different sensibility than this highly sort of instant gratification, convenience, and everything disposable society we currently live in?
Well, I don't think World War II changed my perception. It molded it because I was only 5 when the war began. And of course, during the war, everything was rationed and we learned to take nothing for granted, including human life. And every mouthful of food was precious. I mean, I think our ration was 2 squares of chocolate a week and 1 egg a week and things like that. And so it's shocking to me to see the wastefulness of this current generation. But on the other hand, I spent so much time in the developing world, or the global south, I think we call it now. It keeps changing. And there it's the same. Everything is precious, nothing is taken for granted. But even there, you get the throwaway society. You get single-use plastic cluttering up the beaches and being washed into the ocean and killing the fish. You know, so many problems to overcome. But maybe that's one advantage of the number of humans on the planet. There's enough people with different passions so that there are groups tackling all of these different problems. And I hear about what they're doing, and it's very encouraging. And by the way, the young people are changing the attitude of their parents and grandparents. And the original ones, we began in 91, they're now out in the adult world, and some of them have decision-making positions. And anyway, they're teachers and parents. And, you know, so already that change is happening. But we have to aim for a critical mass of young people who understand, yes, we need some money to live, but it's when we live for money, it goes all wrong. And one of the wonderful things about our Roots and Shoots program is that we try to bring young people together from different cultures, religions, countries, and they're finding out for themselves that much more important than the color of your skin or your religion or your culture is the fact that we're all human beings. And I've had young people from marginalized communities come to one of our gatherings and say, this is the first time I haven't felt any discrimination.
It is pretty amazing. I'm so inspired by the younger generation too. Having said that, Jane, I know you have some concern about what has been called slacktivism, people sitting in the comfort of their homes and learning about the natural world through clicks and statistics instead of going out and experiencing it.
Unfortunately, there are many people today who actually don't have the opportunity to go out into nature. And we have to realize that we're not separate from the natural world. We're part of it, and we depend on it for food, water, clothing, clean air, water, everything. And what we depend on is healthy ecosystem. And an ecosystem is made up of this biodiversity of life forms, animals and plants. I like to call it the tapestry of life. And I learned in the rainforest that every little species has a role to play. And as one species disappears, it's like pulling a thread from that tapestry. And it may seem unimportant, but maybe it was a major food for another species, and that will disappear. Another thread pulled out. And when you pull out enough threads from these tapestries, they hang in tatters, and an ecosystem will collapse. So it's really desperately important that we work really hard to restore the environment and biodiversity. So we try in our program and many other youth programs to get young people into nature as early as possible, because you need to experience it. And the next best thing is watching documentaries, but it's not the same. So children need to be able to mess about in the earth. We're very hampered in some countries by health and health and safety regulations.
Mhm.
And it's so sad. I mean, when I was growing up, you know, you played around in the dirt and that built up your immune system. And if you got a little sick, well, that was good for you in the long run. I mean, I touch wood, I'm never sick. I never had flu. I never had a flu shot. I've had to have shots for this pandemic because I don't think I'd be allowed to go anywhere ever again if I don't. But, and also it's a very bad disease. But, you know, unless young people understand nature and get involved in it and experiencing it, they're not going to understand the need or not have the desire to protect it. So it's really urgent to, if you can't get children into nature, then bring nature to children, bring animals to children. It makes a big difference.
About 30 years ago, Jane, you went from being a scientist to being an activist. What was the turning point for you that made you feel that you had to preach the gospel of the environment, so to speak, and not simply work in a, more isolated way?
It was 1986. And by that time, you know, I was more or less full-time Gombe National Park with the chimpanzee research. I built up a little research station with students. It was the best days of my life, hours out in the rainforest. But then at this conference, we brought together, by that time, there were, I think it was 6, maybe 7 other field study sites across Africa where people were studying chimps. And we had one morning, it was a 4-day meeting. We had one morning on conservation. We had one morning, or maybe they were afternoons, doesn't matter, on conditions in some captive situations, like medical research labs, for example, cruel training of circus chimps. And so I went to that conference. I finally got my PhD, because when I began, I hadn't been to college. And I left as an activist. I mean, it wasn't a decision. I liken it to St. Paul on the road to Damascus, when something happened and boom, like that, he changed from persecuting the early Christians to preaching the gospel. And so that's what happened to me. I went as a scientist. I left as an activist, or I like to call it advocate. Activist, somehow, it just has a little feeling inside me of being aggressive. And I don't think aggression gets you anywhere.
What does get you someplace?
So I think the only way for change is people have to change from within. So I have to try and reach the heart. And how do I do that? By always spending a few moments just trying to get some feeling for that person. I mean, you can look up ahead of time, but, you know, is there something that's a common denominator? Like, do we both love dogs? Do we both have grandchildren, or whatever it is? And like with one person, both our fathers raced cars. I mean, just something. And then your mind is working and you pick out a story that you think will make its mark. And what's really interesting is that sometimes you tell these stories and you feel you haven't made any difference. And then later on, you find you did reach the heart. And people begin to think differently. And that's what needs to happen. That's why I say this aggression doesn't, for me anyway, doesn't work.
You turned 87 on April 3rd. So happy birthday. You've had such an extraordinary life. And when you look back on your experiences, is there one thing that you feel so grateful for or so fulfilled by as you think about all the things you've done, all the people you've met, and all the lives you've touched and the hearts you've touched?
Well, absolutely. It's my upbringing. I had the most amazing mother. She's here behind me somewhere. I can't remember where she is. She's up there.
She is.
David Graybeard, yes, there she is. And she supported my passion for animals. She supported my desire to go and live with animals and write books about them in Africa when I was just 10, when not even men were doing that. Everybody laughed at me and I was just a girl. The girls didn't do anything like that. But Mum always said, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of opportunity. If you don't give up, maybe you find a way. And that's the message I've taken to young people, especially in disadvantaged communities. And I wish Mum was alive to know how many people have said, Jane, thank you. You taught me because you did it. I can do it too. I even had a letter this morning saying that. So having my mother and an amazing supportive family that I grew up with right here in this house. And then as I've been going around the world and building the Jane Goodall Institutes, there's 25 of them now around the world, building the roots and shoots. I've just met so many amazing people. And it's these teams who are enabling me to do what I do now. Wonderful, extraordinary people with all their different talents and skills and the heart they bring into it. So I've just been amazingly lucky. I've had extraordinary experiences. The fact that Louis Leakey chose me to study not just any animal, but the one most like us, helped me to get science to change its reductionist idea that the difference between us and animals was one of kind. That's what I was told in the early 60s. And I was told I couldn't talk about chimpanzees having personalities, minds capable of problem solving, or emotions, because those were unique to us. And I shouldn't even have named them. I should have given them numbers. And I shouldn't have empathy for them. I should be objective. And you can't be both, which is rubbish, by the way. But because of this dog, Rusty, he taught me as a child, of course animals have minds, personalities, and emotions. And so I was able to stand up to the professors. And because of the chimp's behavior and biology being so like ours, you know, we share 98.6% of our DNA with them. And then my then husband, Hugo van Lauwik's film came out through the National Geographic. And so there wasn't any confrontation. There wasn't any point where people said, oh, we were wrong. No, but just gradually science came to accept that we are not the only beings with personality, mind, and feeling, and we're part of and not separate from the rest of the animal kingdom.
You were such a pioneer. And when you see so many women in the field of science today, it must make you so proud. And I'm sure you played a part in that.
Well, I have played a part in it because I know that simply from all the people, the young people who've told me or written to me. And I mean, there's hundreds of them, literally, who say, like one example, a young woman in China, she desperately wanted to study pandas. Everybody told her that was impossible. Now I'm going back to the 70s, and she somehow got hold of a book that I'd written. It was had an odd history. It was translated from the Russian into Chinese, checking back on the English original. It's a very odd, I can't imagine how full of mistakes it was. But anyway, she read that book, In the Shadow of Man, and she thought, well, if Jane can do it, I can do it. And she was the first person to see a wild giant panda give birth. And that's just one example out of hundreds of young women who were inspired to think, well, Jane did it, so I can do it too. And that's thanks to my mother. That's thanks to my mother. It's not me. I mean, so much that's happened in my life. I've I don't take any of it for granted. And I know that, I don't know, I was put here for a reason. I just have a very strong feeling of mission, that I'm here and I've been given the tools and the gifts like communication to make that a reality. It's a very strange feeling, but it's grown upon me more and more and more, that things were set out in my life and all I had to do at a turning point was choose the right path. And I think I did.
Not everyone can say that, but we're glad you chose the path you chose, Jane. And congratulations again on this wonderful, very well-deserved prize.
Well, thank you. And it's going to help me to build out some of the programs I'm so passionate about in Africa, protecting forests, animals, and helping young people on their way ahead.